All right, everybody. Welcome to the Layman's Law School. I'm your host today, Reid Sanders, where me and Mr. Shawn Merzlack, two Southern gentlemen lawyers, are trying to help the layman understand the legal process. And today...
And have a good time at the same time.
We always have a good time, Shawn.
Especially when the boss isn't here.
That's right. The inmates will play. So today we're going to talk about Michigan sign stealing, penalties, TRO, temporary restraining order, that kind of stuff. But before we do, in customary fashion, we need to celebrate the week. We need to celebrate the week. So there you go, sir. Brought an extra one for Chace, even though he's not here. And they do just...
I'm sure we'll put it to use.
Yeah, I mean, that's just... I didn't want to leave him out.
Sure.
Oh, that's glorious. It's a good week. Good week.
Good start to a Friday afternoon.
That's right. So let's give a little background. Basically, what has occurred is that Michigan...
And we're talking about Michigan football.
Thank you.
Michigan football.
Michigan football has been accused, and I think the evidence is pretty strong against them, that they were scouting in person and recording opposing or upcoming opposing teams to steal the signs of the other team. And the background I kind of want to give is why college has signs and why the NFL does not. And even there's even in high school they don't. They can have different audio equipment. So you can have audio equipment.
High school is allowed audio equipment now?
In a lot of them,
okay.
Yes. So it's kind of weird that entities above college and below college in football will have the same thing, but the one in the middle doesn't. And so
very weird. Yeah.
So it's strange. And the biggest reason is that in the NFL, they want to make sure everybody's on the same playing field. And the NFL has very, very, very few, I think only 2 manufacturers of helmets. And so the manufacturer of the helmet is also the one who's going to be in charge of producing the audio equipment.
Sure.
The offense coordinator talks to the quarterback, the defense coordinator talks to the linebacker, and so forth. In the NCAA, their reasoning for not having it is twofold. Number one, they said that the smaller schools wouldn't be able to afford it. And secondly, that they have tons of companies that do different helmets. And so they may be giving a benefit to certain schools and harming other schools because the brands aren't the same. So you may have one that's not as good as the other one and vice versa. And lastly, if something goes wrong and there is some kind of action where you could have a civil action, it'd be very difficult to have somebody to go after, essentially, somebody to sue, because there's so many types of companies and different avenues.
And they're regulating or not allowing this, and one of the reasons is because smaller schools might not be able to afford it. Mm-hmm. Yet we now allow bigger schools with bigger money to basically pay players to come to come play.
I think it's completely nonsense, but that is the reasoning that the NCAA gave. I don't really buy it that much. I don't know why they don't. I don't know. Probably because they want to get more money in their pocket, but that's the reasoning they gave. So essentially you have the NCAA who's in charge of it all, the Big Ten, who is like the state government. So the NCAA is the federal government, Big Ten's the state government, and Michigan would be a county of kind of a analogy.
Big Ten being just the conference, and Michigan football or Michigan University being just a player.
Right. So essentially the NCAA looked into it, and Big Ten joined in, and the Big Ten is the one who suspended Harbaugh for 3 games and wanted to do more investigation of what was going on. And then Jim Harbaugh filed a temporary restraining order with the University of Michigan against the Big Ten.
How did they figure out that? Like, who complained on this, or how did they figure it out?
Well, that's a whole nother podcast. But the main theory is, I believe his name is Day. It's one of the coaches, I think the head coach of Ohio State. His brother is an attorney, and it was sent in from an attorney's office complaining about Michigan sign stealing from an anonymous attorney in that area.
Interesting.
So that's just a theory. I don't know. That hadn't been played out. So, but I kind of That it has a lot of legs.
Well,
I'll tell you
that wasn't even really the question.
Right.
I was more asking, how was the person stealing the signs?
I got you. So one of the things that has been shown and I've seen is that I think the guy's name is Connor Stallions, and he was sometimes putting on the, a different team's uniform to be on the sideline. He'd have sunglasses that were the recording kind, even if it's a night game, and you could even see the light on the glasses that it was recording.
So he's just staring across the sideline to the other team,
Sure.
watching the signs the entire time, and obviously documenting what play was ran at that point.
And you could time it up, too, with the game tape that you have. So whatever he's recording, he's just looking at the assistant coaches, the backup quarterback, or the backup linebackers, whoever holding those signs up where it has popcorn and Christmas trees and different wrappers or whatever it is. And so by doing that, you can decipher what type of play. And then there are videos later on showing all the Michigan players playing the opposing team that was scouted and them all knowing what play and calling it out. And so it 100% happened. Now, Jim Harbaugh may not have known it was happening, probably did, but he is the one in charge, so it's his responsibility. So Michigan and Jim Harbaugh.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown. Sometimes you just have to take one for the team.
No pun intended.
Exactly.
So, Shawn, you are a magistrate judge, and you've also done prosecution and defense and all kinds of stuff. What is a temporary restraining order? What is the purpose of it? What is it?
Well, there's various kinds. Obviously, most people think of, restraining orders as like a temporary protection order where a person that's been abused in a domestic relationship files against their abuser to keep that abuser away. What we're talking about is a form of what's called injunctive relief. That is where you are asking the court for an order to prohibit someone or an entity from doing something. And it's not necessarily to keep them away from you or anything like that. So when you have something that you believe someone else or another entity is doing that is going to cause you some type of damages or harm, you can go to the courts and ask for injunctive relief, which is an order saying you are not allowed to do this. How you go through that process, especially in an emergency situation like this was, I think you said they gave him this suspension on a Friday afternoon.
Big Ten informed Michigan that they were suspending Harbaugh with further investigation on Friday afternoon, past noon, and Michigan football had a game at noon on Saturday.
So we've got, maybe 4 hours of time that the actual courts are open to try and get something together. And they did. And that's what they filed for it was a petition for, a temporary restraining order to restrain that particular decision of the Big Ten from moving forward.
Right. I think one thing, and as well as I do, probably more so, is that just even talking to my wife about it, but most people don't understand that you're restraining an action. You're stopping an action. It's not against a person. Now, you can have a restraining order against a person, but it has to be something they're doing. You're restraining somebody from doing something, or it's not just, you can't have a restraining order against Shawn Merzlak. You gotta have a restraining order of Shawn Merzlak preventing him from doing an action of some
sort.
Correct.
Going within 1,000 feet of this person's house or this person at all. Or in this, particular scenario, they're trying to enjoin the actual punishment, from going through.
Right.
And when they do these types of things, and then it's an emergency situation, the judge could have signed it right then and there. Sure. And issued a temporary restraining order. Mm-hmm. The temporary restraining order, as long as you've made some pretty good efforts to notify the opposing party who you're seeking the injunctive relief against, if it's something serious, an emergency, and it's going to cause you immediate damages, like in this case, being unable to coach the football game the next day, sure, the judge could have signed it right then and then immediately set a hearing for a couple days later when everybody could get together. But in this case, he did not do that.
Yeah, and it's strange that he didn't. I mean, most of the time when you have situations like this, this is kind of an unusual situation, but like you said, if you can show that it's going to cause you harm, then you're innocent until proven guilty in our country, and it's kind of like you're getting the punishment before, and you can't back up time.
Sure.
Can't go. Let's say that nothing did happen, and this was false allegations. You can't back up time and let the coach go coach again.
Correct.
And that's a problem. And so, one of the things well, first of all, one of the things that I wanted to talk about is this was filed ex parte, and this is a Latin phrase. What does that mean?
The actual definition, I don't know.
I have it written down.
I know what it means.
Yeah, but the Latin meaning is by or for one party. That doesn't give you the definition.
Sure. What ex parte is a one-sided proceeding, like when a person goes alone to a judge without the other person there, and that's why it's the only type of things that are done ex parte like this. Are in cases of emergency where emergency relief is needed. Something is needed very, very rapid. And that's why, especially in injunctive relief situations, you're going to have a very strong showing that you at least tried to notify the other party and tried to get them there. And the judge is going to set a hearing immediately, within the next couple of days, because no judge wants to just take one side of things. They'll do it for emergency purposes to prevent someone from being harmed or prevent damages, but they want to set up a hearing immediately so that person or entity that it is against has their due process and is able to respond to the allegations and try and persuade the judge otherwise.
Yeah, and normally, as lawyers, you can get into some serious trouble and some hot water if you're doing things ex parte on the regular.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's prohibited with the exception of scheduling things. Anytime you're talking about the actual facts of a case or something like that, you are not allowed to talk to a judge without the other party. If you send an email to the judge about another case, even if it was for scheduling purposes. We're still going to just copy the other attorney so that they're part of the conversation. They realize that there was no inappropriate communication about the case.
Right. And so Michigan files this action for the temporary restraining order and preliminary injunction. And in Michigan, the way that you have to do this is you have to show that it's an immediate and irreparable injury, loss, or damage. And so that's the hardest part for Michigan football in this case, in my opinion, is it's going to be difficult to show that it's irreparable injury by having the coach miss one game until the hearing. And that's the only reason I think the judge didn't
I
sign it.
I kind of disagree because
sure,
what you said earlier was like, I don't know who Michigan played this last week.
I think it was Penn State, and they're a very good team.
I was watching the Bulldogs, and not paying attention to those teams.
This is what the judge gave as his explanation of it, is that it didn't reach the standard of being irreparable harm or injury because there was coaches available to coach and that kind of thing.
Sure.
But I agree with you.
That game will never be played again.
Right.
It's gone and in the past.
And I know that, once the players are on the field, I mean, I've played tons of sports and team sports. The preparation is only a coach can only do so much once that's out there, but it's not great in my opinion. I think that if I was the judge, I would have granted it and set a hearing. Because like you said, when you take away a head coach in a huge game without much leeway time, you really can't have everybody move up a spot and be prepared. So I do see it as irreparable harm because it was such a high-powered game. If Michigan lost that game, they more than likely would be kicked out of the playoffs. And the playoffs, if you have one team enter for your conference receives $6 million. So we're talking about a game that could be huge for money of Michigan.
So when the Big Ten has imposed this 3-game suspension, is that only for Big Ten conference games?
No,
just the next 3 games.
It's my understanding that it's the next 3 games. And now in this situation, the next 3 games, I believe, were all Big Ten games, but and those 3 games were essentially the end of the regular season. So
I know exactly why Jim Harbaugh dropped it.
Why is that?
Because should they have given him the temporary restraining order, allowed him to coach, the Big Ten does the rest of their investigation over a week or 2 and goes back to the judge and says, no, this is why we did it. And the judge says, okay, that's your ruling. What games would Jim Harbaugh be missing? College football playoffs,
sure.
National championship if he's in it.
Right.
He'd rather take the punishment now, regular season games, and be done with it.
And especially when the temporary restraining order was not granted. So you've already missed the Penn State game, and you won. And that was there's really only 1 game left for him that's huge, and that's the Ohio State game. He's going to miss that. But even so, I agree with you. It's very telling on kind of why he gave it up. I think that the evidence against not necessarily him, but Michigan was so damning that he wasn't going to be able to win it regardless. And lastly, that the I guess the deal that they broke, they being the Big Ten and Michigan, was that Harbaugh was going to keep his 3-game suspension, meaning he's suspended for 2 more games. But this is a big but. The investigation was going to no longer look into Jim Harbaugh. They would still look into Connor Stallions, who's not employed by Michigan, and some other actions that way. But a part of the deal is that
it's a plea bargain.
Exactly what it is. So Jim Harbaugh probably was saying, maybe he's innocent of this, but he might have some skeletons in his closet. It says, hey, I've already had to miss 1. I'll miss these 2. We'll call it dead.
What do you mean you'd like my phone? I lost it.
What is this $10,000 transfer to John McGee from Western Illinois? Can you explain that, sir? I think there's going to be a lot of that, and that's one of the reasons. But there's not a lot to this, but I do think it was interesting as far as how it just kind of went, the process of it. One thing that I don't know yet, and we'll know as more stuff comes out, is how the NCAA is going to look at it. Just like,
oh sure, because his deal was just with the Big Ten,
right?
I mean, the NCAA can still do their own investigation. They're not bound by anything that the Big Ten agreed to, but
right. It's kind of what I was going to point to is that it's kind of, people are going to say double jeopardy, but it's kind of like state and federal. Like, explain that.
A different sovereign.
But I mean, you could be charged with murder, right, in the state of Georgia.
Let's say you were charged with, let's just use the easier one, drugs and guns.
Sure, yeah.
Cases that can be prosecuted federally or at the state level. Initially, most cases start with a arrest for state charges.
Right.
And a lot of times the federal government will pick it up. You could be prosecuted for the state offenses as well as for the violations of federal law in federal court. Typically, very rarely does it happen because it's a kind of a waste of judicial resources. Usually the 2 parties get together, figure out if this is a really bad dude, where he's going to get the worst, sentence. And sometimes that's the state system, but sometimes that's the federal system. So that's, what kind of equates to the same thing, that you've got 2 different governments regulating you, the NCAA as well as your conference, the Big Ten or the SEC or whoever. And just because you made a deal with the Big Ten doesn't mean that the NCAA can't, continue to look into, whatever they believe is cheating or getting an unfair competitive advantage by, stealing the opponent's signs in that fashion.
Yeah. And you certainly could have, and I'm not sure of all the Big Ten rules, but the NCAA rules certainly could have a violation of Big Ten rules that doesn't violate NCAA rules,
Sure.
and vice versa. So there are different standards, I guess you will. So the NCAA may say you can't do any in-person scouting, and I believe that's one of the rules. And you certainly can't use any kind of recording. You can't record stuff while you're there. But the Big Ten may say not only can you not do that, but you can't have the other teams film. They could make
make a
extra
rule
rules.
like that. Oh yeah.
So maybe the Big Ten had other rules that were even more damning than what we know of from the NCAA. But the Big Ten is essentially saying we're not messing with this anymore. We are happy with the penalty for Jim Harbaugh, like you said, falling on the sword. It's not really against him; it's against the school. It's the football team, the Michigan football team. But he's taking the fall for it. But I would be very surprised if the NCAA didn't come in and have at least an investigation or more of an investigation. There have some, and maybe have more sanctions. Maybe not against Jim Harbaugh, but maybe against the Michigan school itself. Maybe could be something to do with the NIL money. It could be
Take
losing
them out
a
of
bowl
the,
game.
Yeah, take them
It
out
could
of the
be-
bowl game or the
Yeah.
playoff picture for a year or two. I
Sure.
mean, that we've heard of sanctions like that being tossed around and
I don't think it's
contemplated.
that I don't think that that's unfair. Like I said, the money speaks, and if I was other conferences, I would be screaming for that, because the Big Ten, they don't care about Michigan, but they do care about one of their teams making the playoffs.
Absolutely.
And it is pretty obvious that some of Michigan's wins were at least tainted. That doesn't mean that they would not have won if they didn't steal the signs, but it certainly helped them win.
Absolutely.
It's the Astros banging on drums to know when a curveball's coming. That doesn't mean the Astros would not have won the World Series, but it certainly helped them win the World
They
Series.
still had to hit the curveball.
That's right. That's right. But it's kind of like with this one, it's really more for your defense. And if you look at, I believe it was against Notre Dame. Notre Dame had a good offense, and they're humming along. And the one game they played Michigan, which they have evidence of Michigan scouting Notre Dame prior, that the Notre Dame offense just did nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. And it was an
when
anomaly.
you know where everyone's going,
But you still had to stop it.
No, I agree.
No, I'm joking. But it's the same thing. Like it's you still got to stop it. I certainly couldn't. But if I know where the play's going, I at least got a shot.
we could at least get in the way.
Right. You'd have to.
We might not stop it,
right?
but we might slow the person down so someone else could.
You'd truck me, and then somebody else could come get him. But and so I'd slow their 4.3 speed down to about a 5. Just speed bump, if you will. But it is an interesting case, and I do think that the NCAA has to do something. Let's say that this year you end with Florida State going undefeated. There is a possibility that Florida State is in the ACC, that they go undefeated and don't make the playoffs, the top 4, and don't get in over some of these one-loss teams. If Ohio State and Michigan both could have a loss, Alabama has a loss if Georgia loses in the SEC championship. So all 4 of those teams have losses. I could easily see all of those teams getting ahead of Florida State with no losses. And if I was Florida State or the ACC,
we'd be pissed at
I would
Michigan.
be screaming.
Oh, absolutely.
And because you're losing a bunch of money, a bunch of publicity, and it is proven time and time again, whether people want to admit it, these schools are for-profit schools, and their biggest way to make money is through
College
football.
Absolutely.
And look at Texas A&M prior to Johnny Manziel and after Johnny Manziel. Shows you everything you need to know.
Absolutely.
So that's where we are. A little bit shorter episode today. Me and Shawn are to the point. Sometimes unlike our counterpart.
Well, and we don't have to, bring up random things about, involuntary participation in the military at age 18. I mean, stuff like that. Just wild ideas. We bring you the facts, show you how it's legally related, give our take on it, and we're out.
I forget what it was. A mandatory military, and I forgot his other wild one. But everything was based off the mandatory military. Sure. So anyway, Chace, hope you're out there sharpening knives in the woods, having a great time. Until next time, we'll see y'all next week for another episode of the Layman's Law School. See you then.